that hasn't been before the independent hearings panel. And then, as you said, when you come to making your decision, you can accept your recommendations or you can reject any of those recommendations. And in rejecting those recommendations, you can provide an alternative recommendation, but you do need to provide the reasons for those rejecting those. Any recommendations that you do decide to reject will go to the minister, and the minister will make that final decision. The minister does not have a time frame to make that decision. However, you as a council, you do have a time frame to make a decision. So the 20th of May is the council meeting that you do need to make a decision for us to be able to meet our recommendations. Just one other point, in accepting any of the recommendations of the independent hearings panel, you're also accepting their reasons, which is, I think, quite important for some of the points. So I've stepped out that, yeah. So in terms of you're accepting your two options, which are to accept all of them, or you can reject some. And in terms of how this will be reported up to council, you'll be given those options. So there's no recommendation, there's resolutions within the council report for you to consider. In terms of the recommendations from the independent hearings panel, they have largely accepted the council officers' recommendations from our closing statement, which were obviously, as you know, quite far-reaching. So that is rezoning all of our residential areas to medium density residential zone and enabling
the medium density residential standards and also proposing the high density residential zone around those identified centres. And so that's to provide that additional height around the centres. And then there are 6 key recommendations that are different from the council officer's recommendation from the hearing, which I've set out there. So the first recommendation is in the Mount Maunganui North area. Their recommendation is to revert to the proposed, what we notified through Plan Change 33. So that's to retain the existing high density residential zone extent. The rest is medium density residential and not to enable any additional height within that area. The second recommendation that differs from councils is in relation to the Pukahinahina site, significant cultural site, where a submitter sought a view shaft from the Pukahinahina site to Mowal, and that's our recommendation was to that it should be done through a separate plan change process and a full plan change process, and then we could consider everything, because there are limitations with Plan Change 33 of how far we can take things because of legislation. The recommendations of the panel differ in that they are proposing or recommending a view shaft, and that is to limit height to what we call our operative city plan, which is a 9 metre height limit with a 2 metre permitted intrusion. Also related to the Pukahinahina site is on the other side of the road, so on the Mitre 10 side, we recommended from a staff perspective for more transitional height, so 12 metres over the Mitre 10 site, transitioning to 22 metres across half of the car park, and then transitioning up to 27 metres. There were 2 kind of options put to the panel in that respect, and we did do landscape assessment on the difference in terms of that visual effect. And their recommendation is to have, instead of 3 transitional heights, just to have 2. So have the Mitre 10 site, which is 12 metres, which is its current height within the city plan, and then transitioning straight up to 27 within the car park. And that's across the rest of that shopping centre. The fourth recommendation that differs is Area F within the city centre. So that is the block between the Strand and Willow Street. In the current city plan, we have a height limit of 16 metres. That is due to ensuring access to light and keeping the openness along that strand as a public space. That was one submitter opposed that and sought to have unlimited height in that location, and the independent hearings panel have agreed with that, and so they've proposed to remove area F. It gets included in what we call area A, which is unlimited height across that site. What that means in practice is that the airport flight path will be your height limit, which is 48.7 metres. So you're thinking 13, 14 stories will be enabled in terms of height. The fifth is around the rail. It was a vibration alert layer. It was very common across every council that progressed an IPO from KiwiRail. Every council's dealt with it a little bit differently, of course. Our recommendation was to have it as an advice note, so it is not a rule within the city plan. That was agreed by the independent hearings panel, but in terms of the distance, so where that advice note would be identified, we recommended 100 metres from the rail designation, and the panel have pulled that back to 60 metres in terms of that distance from the designation. And then the last is around our private accessways. So we propose some changes to our accessway rules, and we propose to have, if you've got up to 4 dwellings on a site, and you're further than 20 metres from the road frontage, to have a 3.5 metre wide carriageway. And they have, their recommendation is to increase that to 4 metres, and that's largely due to the fire and emergency letter that was provided in terms of ensuring sufficient space for them to be able to get down. So the reason being is that within 20 metres of the road frontage, their trucks can be parked on the road, they can reach the fire with their appliances. If it's further than 20 metres, they need to be able to get down that private way, and that's where they sought that 4 metres. So that's the snapshot of the 6 recommendations, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions shared.
Thank you. You mentioned at the beginning that if we accept the panel's recommendations, we also accept their reasons. If we have different reasoning, are we able to account for different reasoning?
To clarify, so you were saying you accept the recommendation, but your reasoning
May be different.
is different. Probably need to check in terms of the legal advice. It really comes down to those, I suppose, the implications further down the track, and if we see that there's any implications in terms of making that decision.
Are there any?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. So what Ashley has just mentioned is if we were to, so we're always open to judicial review, and so if we end up in a judicial review process and we've accepted those reasons.
It would be helpful to know if there are any reasons that differ from the reasons that council's advanced.
What you're asking is what is the process? So we've outlined a process.
No,
if you agree with
I know
it.
the process, but I'm asking. So we've got some different recommendations, but what you're signalling is that we might agree with some of the recommendations, but for different reasons, and those reasons then go into the plan change. So I'm asking, are there any that we have to have a look at?
I would say in terms of accepting, particularly for the vibration alert layer,
yeah,
it really came down to the experts. We relied on the experts. There was difference between the written expert evidence and what was spoken in the hearing. But the reasoning is the same, and it doesn't make any difference really. The same with the carriageway. the reasoning that we put forward for 3.5 and why they put forward for 4 metres, the reasoning is the same. They've just chosen a different number. When you start, even for the C, which is the Mitre 10, the reasoning is the same. It's just what the height is and what's considered acceptable, I suppose. But when you get to the Mount North, if you look at the council officer's reasoning for the recommendation we provided in terms of additional height and the recommendations of the independent hearings panel and their reasoning, you'll see they're very different. So by accepting their, and this is the council officer's recommendation, but by accepting their recommendation, it is quite different from where the council position was, I suppose. So it's pretty hard to make that alignment in particular. And then with the pukahinahina, it's really, we understand the reasoning. I suppose it's the mechanics and the process in which you do that. The council officer's view was that it would be something that we saw more appropriate to have as a separate plan change process, because the view shaft with the 9 metres, the plus the 2 metres permitted intrusion, the view shaft would be lost. So by progressing a view shaft through this process, you're not truly creating a view shaft, because someone could still build, especially right close to Pukahinahina site, and that view shaft is being lost. So while we understand the reasoning and we agree that in terms of the cultural significance of the site and we should be doing further work on the view shaft, the view was it should be done through a private plan change. So they've all got, I suppose, different scenarios in terms of how they've come with their recommendation. So hopefully that helps.
But outside of those 6, are there others where the recommendation is the same but the reasoning is different?
No, so all the other recommendations, so all the other recommendations, and these are the 6 are the key ones. There's some minor, they've updated some numbering and slight wording and things, but the reasoning and the purpose is exactly the same, is the same as council's recommendation.
Any other questions? Planners?
It would be helpful just to understand what the height is of the Twin Towers and the apartment complex adjacent to Blake Park. It has mixture of a cafe and so I know just in terms of being able to understand, because it talks about stories and that, but just understanding what the height in metres of those are.
So the Elizabeth Towers, that's what you're talking about, the Twin Towers?
The Twin Towers, the far end by Maua.
Oh, right, okay, yep.
And the apartment complex adjacent across the road from Blake Park, but on the corner of Monganui Road and Hina.
We'll be able to provide you with that information of those various heights that have been built to.
It gives you a better
Yes.
picture when you know how many stories they're talking. Well, they're talking in metres and what that actually translates to.
Yep.
Stephen?
I'd like to understand more about the implications, particularly for the Mount North, but also the CBD, on housing supply numbers and their obligations under the Urban Development Policy, UD. Because, if you look at the Plan Change 33, potentially 2,655 dwellings enabled, although it's considered that the feasibility will be markedly less than that. But that is quite a considerable reduction in housing potential, particularly intensification, which is one of the key objectives really of the whole Plan Change 33 process. So understanding the numbers around that, I think is critical to our decision.
That chair, I'd be interested because there's some that's enabled. It's what the difference is
Difference, yeah.
between what the council had proposed and then, what had been notified and then what the council through the 42A recommended.
Yes.
It's that difference.
So for the city centre, the recommendation of the independent hearings panel is to increase the height. So we've proposed 16 metres, which is generally about 5 stories. And you're looking at 13 to 14 stories. So much more development capacity being enabled. It is difficult to provide you a more exact number because the development capacity assessment that was undertaken for Plan Change 33 was done by centre or by zone. So it didn't, so for example, I can provide you the development capacity numbers for the city centre, but it didn't break it down to the different areas. So it doesn't provide you with that development capacity difference by what was notified in Area F or what the council officer's recommendation is versus what the independent hearings panel, it would have to be an estimate on that. And
That would help.
yeah,
That would help.
in terms of the Mount North, we can provide a little bit more certainty in terms of the development capacity because the development capacity assessment was taken, as I said, by centre or by zone. So each of the centres, such as Bethlehem, Bayfair, each of those centres, an individual development capacity assessment was undertaken, and that was plan enabled, so what the city plan enables, but then we need to realise that there's some realities around that. So the assessment capacity also takes into account what we call feasibility and reasonably expect to be realised. So is it feasible to build a 4-storey or 6-storey development on every site? No, it's not. 2, you've got to have the reality of, is someone willing to sell it? And if that person's going to buy it, are they actually going to develop a 4 or a 6-storey development? But we can provide more, a better idea of numbers. So in terms of the status quo, so what I'd say is the notified version of the city plan in terms of Mount North, the estimation was around 105 what we call horizontal dwellings. So that's like townhouses side by side, and about 15 new dwellings vertical. So that's getting, vertical. And then if you put Plan Change 33 on that, so that's enabling the MDRS, is that permitted activity. So 3 dwellings is a permitted activity. And the additional height that was recommended by council officers within the Mount North area, there's a 1,000, well, when we get to, I suppose, feasibility, which is the important part, it's feasible to get 110 horizontal, so side by side, and 180 dwellings when you start going vertical. So if we do not enable additional height, that 180 starts to be reduced and you're more likely to get the 110. And that's feasible. That's what's actually expected to be delivered. Does that make sense? I can go through it again because there's a lot of numbers.
Yes, it does. But those 180 vertical or 110 horizontal are buildings, not dwellings.
Dwellings.
Houses.
Dwellings, yes. Yep.
But RER seems very low.
It's taking into account a number of matters within the Mount North area. So there's the land costs, development costs, because of we have liquefaction, so design needs to be different. We have flooding, we have inundation, so that's where that number tends to come down because of the complexities of developing within that area.
Quite a small, it's quite a small area. It's not the whole of the mount.
Correct. Goes down to about Sutherland is the area that was investigated for Mount North.
Okay, any other questions? All right. Okay, look, thank you very much. I think I can see Barry sitting there. So we were very clear that we wanted to have this process and open so that everyone understood that in fact the Commission is making the decisions. So we take it from here, that the process is done as openly as we possibly can, and that we will be getting advice to us before we make any decisions that is not from staff. So that division, that separation is clear for the public, because this is a significant issue for us to be making relatively close to the end of our tenure. We understand we have to make it. These are the timelines that are set down under legislation. So we want to do it in as comprehensive a way and as open a way as we possibly can, so that people can be assured that it isn't being led by staff or I was going to say interfered with by staff, but I mean that in a positive way. Influenced by staff, unduly influenced by staff. All right. Thank you very much. I think that's the end of the workshop. 20th of May, when we come back with our decisions. Thank you very much.